Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Celtic Way. I am your host, John McGinley, joined by Ryan McGinley this morning. We're here to chat through all the latest Celtic news and events of the week during the international break. How do you feel about international breaks, Ryan? Do you like them? Do you hate them? What's your feelings on them?
I like them as a little bit of a break from the rough and tumble of the league season, but in terms of the actual football that comes in, if it's not the World Cup or the European Championships, then unfortunately, well, I'll maybe tune into a Scotland game here or there, but I'm not that interested in international football. I do tend to think that domestic football, Celtic, is the real football. So that's my sort of takeaway on it. Sorry to any international fans out there.
Yeah, I'm similar. I actually hate it. I just don't like the absence of Celtic. I am a Celtic addict, as they say. Listen, good morning, everyone. Good to see people joining the chat. We're changing the way we start the show. We're not having no longer having that longer intro, so we're just coming in a little bit hot. So it takes a little bit longer for everyone to get into the chat and say hello. But I do see some of the regulars. Yeah, Ryan, I think we're going to chat about a variety of issues. You know, this today. Again, if people want to send us questions from the chat or talking points from the chat, feel free to do so. I will try and highlight them and bring them in as the show develops. I guess before we start, I do have to say word to our sponsor at Simply Furniture, who are an independent furniture brand dedicated to bringing luxury and contemporary style into homes across the UK. They have a dedicated team to ensure furniture is delivered with care right to your doorstep. With over a decade of experience in furniture retail, they source only the finest pieces, curated for quality, comfort and timeless design, it says here. And listen, if you want to see their furniture range up close, you can visit their showroom in Hillington, Glasgow, as I mentioned. And if you mention the Celtic Way, you will get a special in-store discount. If you're curious about what they have to offer, there are links below in the description. Ryan, interesting 24 hours or so, just with regard to the kind of the fallout of the fan meeting on Monday evening. It seems to me that this has managed to further divide the attendees of this meeting rather than bring anyone together at Celtic. Before I get your view, I'll just update everyone on where it's at, because not everyone might have seen what has happened over the last day or so. Essentially, statements have come out from both the Celtic Fans Collective, this new umbrella protest group organised by, made up of various supporters groups. They released a statement on Monday's meeting, not too happy with kind of how it panned out. I'm not going to read out the whole statement, but essentially they felt that Celtic continued with this form of almost obfuscation to a degree, no real transparency. They did say the meeting was respectful and there was no arguments, is what I'm saying. There was no shouting matches. It was very respectful in tone and stayed calm. But they were worried about some of the stuff that was being said by the club, and specifically in the rejection of the premise of questions, defending their football strategy, saying that though they accepted it could be better communicated to fan. The Celtic Fans Collective said that overall the club believes the football strategy is working and pointed to participation in European competition as evidence of its success. Similarly, the club defended its transfer strategy, citing different factors for transfer activity being difficult, while pointing to examples which they believe is evidence of the strategy working. Interestingly, they said the transfer is a multidisciplinary model. There's no one person who decides on transfers. It is a transfer by committee type situation. But listen, Celtic made it clear that this is by design. It's not something that has happened by accident or that they're uncomfortable with, and that they like it working this way, essentially. Fans may well have a different view. It seems certainly the Celtic Fans Collective do. Transfers over a particular value do have to be authorised by this board of non-executive directors who are involved in that extent. On accountability, the club again rejected the premise of the question, say the Celtic Fans Collective. They also talked about the briefing against Brendan Rodgers from someone speaking to the Scottish Sun. The club say there's kind of no case to answer in that regard, despite Brendan Rodgers coming out and speaking so publicly against it. The meeting produced no tangible outcomes, I think, is the headline from the Celtic Fans Collective statement, which is interesting. Celtic had a very different view of proceedings, everyone. So they were far more positive in their statement. They also released a statement They said that their intention was to comment openly on issues and the kind of everything raised with regard to operations and what they could say outside outside confidentiality. They also say they offered to continue to meet with supporters organisations and that minutes will be coming soon, and that they have a commitment to seek to ensure supporter involvement in meetings with Police Scotland. I think that might be slightly over-egged from what I've heard. I heard that was basically they're going to ask Police Scotland whether fans can be there or not. I don't think it's this grand commitment that they're trying to make up. And yeah, it's interesting, Ryan. As I say, fairly conflicting accounts. Celtic say that they are recognise the concerns raised and they share the frustrations of supporters and valued the opportunity to hear from supporters last night. Supporters clearly feel different. So, where do we start with this?
Where do you start? There's so much to get into when it comes to the two conflicting statements. I think it shows you the stalemate that currently is present between the fan organisations and the club. They're clearly on different viewpoints, have got different viewpoints about a lot of things. It's just a lack of accountability, really, that the Celtic Fans Collective seem to emphasise on their statement. The fact that Celtic were reluctant to change the way that they were operating, despite the fact that in the second statement they talk about how mistakes have been made. So mistakes have been made, but yet they're not willing to change the way that they work. That just seems counterproductive to me, if I'm being honest. It was a bit of a waiting game yesterday. I think everybody was expecting some form of communication to come out yesterday at some point, and then, like buses, we got two almost at one time. One came out from the Celtic Fans Collective, and then a couple of hours later it was Celtic that brought back an earlier response. That was one of the words that was used. They would have brought out something. I'm not even sure if they would have brought out a statement later on, but I think that the Celtic Fans Collective pretty much prompted them to say something after their versions of events. I think it's going to be so interesting if both versions of the minutes are publicly accessible to compare and contrast what is said. That's going to be an interesting task for everybody that's interested.
That highlights the absurdity of all of this to a degree, because how can minutes differ? Yeah, I understand the reality of people have
but they're going to differ, aren't
conversation. But minutes are supposed to be a record of what is said, and so how can that differ when all the people are in the same room? And listen, I think there's a good chance that they will be different in tone and perhaps in some of the detail offered. And I think you're right. I think obviously we all need the minute meetings to determine firm opinions on this. I think for me, it just feels like that Celtic are basically repurposing the content of the statement they released after the transfer window, but trying to do it in a more agreeable, collaborative tone. Now, I'm not saying it's outwardly collaborative. I'm not saying that they're really engaging with supporters in a meaningful way, but I think they're trying to make it appear like that at least. I do take issue with some of the things that the club are meant to have said in that meeting, and trying to kind of pass this off as a communications issue or a perception issue, which I don't think is the case at all. And I think, again, it leads into this thing where the club don't really feel like the fans really know what's going on behind the scenes, which I think is wrong. I think fans are more clued up than maybe the club give them credit for. Obviously, there's details and specific deals that nobody really knows about, and stuff goes on behind the scenes that we're not privy to. But I think in terms of overall strategy and accountability and club structure, I think the clubs are actually pretty well educated on what the issues are at Celtic, I have to be frank. And so it seems a bit weak to me to try and pass this off as a communications issue. And listen, if Celtic think that it is just a communications issue, then I think they're in deeper water than they realise. Now, one of the reasons for why minutes or accounts of meeting might differ is that the club genuinely believe that they're in the right, and that they have no real case to answer in terms of the overall structure or governance of the club. Obviously, I think a lot of fans think that they do have to have that accountability. I'm interested in that they think their model works in general, and their transfer process works in general. This kind of transfer by committee idea, I just don't think that's really conducive to an agile and aggressive club in the transfer market in 2025, personally. I think you really need some sort of individual who has a form of accountability there, and it just been dissipated amongst a wider group of people who are consulted by email on transfer fees and all. That just seems a bit odd to me, Ryan.
It is, it's very odd. And listen, there are some instances where the transfer model does work. You've only got to look back at the summer at some of the sales that Celtic made, or the sale of Nicholas Kuhn, to show that the transfer model does work in terms of selling players, but it doesn't happen often enough for Celtic to be successful. And that ultimately, I think that's one of the factors that cost Celtic in the Champions League. You know, they're not going fully in on a positive model, and that in turn didn't bring them in the players that were required to get through in the Champions League to the league phase. So it can work. It's just that it doesn't work often enough to be considered a success in my eyes, because there's teams that are doing it better off in other places, and similar leagues that are doing it just as good, just as well as Celtic, or even better than Celtic. So I can understand why they're taking that stance, but I do believe that a lot of their the way that they do things is the bare minimum, and that they could be doing so much more. Especially, you know, they'll pat themselves on the back with the fact that they've got that cash reserve in the banks, but they could have so much more if they were to be more effective in the transfer window. Yeah, it's quite annoying, to be honest, because I wanted this meeting to go well. I wanted there to be a positive outcome, and while that still could be the case further down the line, you know, this is the first of hopefully a few meetings between fan representatives and the club. It just feels as if we're at a bit of a standstill rather than anything being resolved or solved or anything like that. From the way that the fan organisations were talking in their statement, you would expect that further protests are going to happen now, which is unfortunate, but it seems in their case pretty necessary after the meeting.
Yeah. I mean, Celtic say we acknowledge that the club is not where we want it to be at the moment, that we've not achieved all of our objectives in the summer transfer window in the Champions League, and that mistakes have been made from which we will learn. Some people were seeing that statement and considering that was new information or a new line from the club. That's something they've really said before. They said it in a slightly different way when the financial results were released. So that's not a massive deviation from where their stance has been previously. So I just want to make that clear. And look, that kind of tone and message wasn't in the Celtic Fans Collective statement. But listen, that's a soundbite from the club. It's not anything of substance. So it's not really something that the Celtic Fans Collective would communicate, especially when the club have really said it before. So some people were looking at that kind of line and being at odds with it and considering, well, why have Celtic said that and why have the Celtic Fans Collective not included that in their statement? I really just think that's nothing really new from the club. It's this same, we accept that we didn't do everything we needed to do in the summer transfer window, but we're not going to communicate on how we change or learn the lessons which need to be learned, which again is interesting depending on your point of view. I think my confusion, and you mentioned there that you hope there'll be more meetings between the club and fans. I guess my viewpoint is I think this initial meeting was important because it at least clarifies where everyone stands on everything, and the minutes will be released and we'll know where each group stands on it. I don't really have a particular appetite for further meetings if Celtic have nothing new to communicate. And I think that's probably why I'm most confused about why this meeting has happened in the first place. Because for me, Celtic arranged this meeting, they have to arrange it when they've got something to offer or something different to communicate to the supporters groups and the wider support. The fact that they didn't really have anything new concerns me, that they've seen this as almost another big box ticking exercise. They didn't have any tangible outcomes or anything to share, or they didn't really, it seems, lay out any kind of process for how they will review the transfer window or what they see Celtic as a club in 2025 and what their next 5 years of strategy is and all that. They do have these sound bites. We want to be a Champions League club. We want to create Champions League players, but there's no detail on any of this, Ryan. And I think if you're looking to the future, and there might be more of these meetings, I think they should only be arranged if Celtic actually have something to say. They just didn't have something to say, and I'm very confused about why they've gone down this route when they knew that they didn't really have anything of substance to offer the supporters who attended.
Yeah, I think that's got to be the guarantee, and I would agree with that Celtic have got to bring more to the table. It's almost as if you're going to an exam without studying. What was the point in even turning up without studying for what you were going in for? You're setting yourself up to fail, and Celtic were setting themselves up to fail with the way that they've clearly went about this meeting, which is really, really disappointing. And we did speak at length on Monday about what Celtic needed to Celtic needed to come prepared with. As much as the fans were going to come prepared with things, and we knew that was going to be the case because this is a good opportunity to meet with the board, meet with members of the board and talk to the hierarchy about what's going on at Celtic, and more importantly what's not going on or what's not going well at Celtic at the moment. Celtic had to come to this with the right tone and, with an appetite to change and a real hunger to make things better. And as much as that soundbite was nice to hear from the club, it's mistakes have been made. We're going to try and change things for the better without it affecting on-field on-field events and on-field matters. Actions speak louder than words, and unfortunately, but without the actions, you have to have the words, and it's clear that the words weren't there in that meeting with the fan organisations, which is really, really disappointing. And I do agree with you that if there is going to be another meeting between the two parties or the several parties that were involved in Monday night's meeting, then Celtic have got to come better prepared next time with a willingness to change their ways. Yes, I think it's pretty obvious that they made mistakes in the transfer window, clearly because they're out of the Champions League, clearly because the squad is underdeveloped. Brendan Rodgers at the weekend saying that a whole position is just, he's still looking for the solutions. The solutions should have been found in the summer transfer window. It's clear that they made mistakes. It's all about how they're going to amend those mistakes or ensure that those mistakes won't happen again in the future. And so far, they don't have the answers for that. So I think that's the most disappointing part for me about Monday night's meeting.
And listen, Celtic are in danger. I think we talk about what the next steps of the protesters are and what comes from this. There's chat in the wind. There has been consistently since all of this started of the concept of boycotts and what that would bring. I'm unsure whether the support have the appetite for that, but I don't think there needs to be an appetite for that, for all of this to be damaging to the club in a business sense of things. I think apathy is perhaps the most dangerous outcome for Celtic out of all this. We're seeing ticket sales are down of late. I've heard the retail sales were down last month as well. So there's issues here that this starts to affect the club's bottom line in a way. And in a year where there is no Champions League money, the fans' money, the transfer money that they put into the club on an annual basis becomes even more important. And I think Celtic need to take this more seriously than considering this as just a perception or communications problem. That's just my view. I think the Celtic supporter are much more clued up on all of this than they give them credit for. And I think essentially people deserve clearer answers, or someone at least talking in front of a camera in a structured way that at least communicates some point of viewpoint that isn't, yeah, it was bad, but we'll do it better next time. That's not good enough. That's a statement that looks to obfuscate the reality of what has gone wrong. And as you say, the lack of accountability is, someone said in the chat here, it's mumbo jumbo to me. That's what it comes across as for me. Like, it does come across as just them saying something for saying something's sake. And I think that's disappointment. Mark Estero making the point, they've done and said nothing different to the statement. I'm assuming he means the statement from the summer after the transfer window. They show absolutely no connection to the club and its current issues. And I think that's true. I think that there isn't really anything tangibly different from the statement released. I think it was just done in a more polite and less. I found the statement that released to be almost aggressive in tone at points. So
Yes.
they've dropped that tone, but changing your tone isn't good enough here, Ryan. It's answers that are needed. It's tangible stuff that's needed here.
Yeah, right after the meeting, or right after the Celtic Fans Collective, they might have put the original statement through ChatGPT and say, take the anger and take the frustration and take the aggressiveness out of this statement, and then just put it out on the website. Because I do agree with you, it did seem pretty similar. And I've only read that statement a couple of times, the one after the transfer window, because the more you read it, the more miffed you get at what they were saying, and that just a total lack of accountability for what transpired in that transfer window and the frustrations of going out for the Champions League. Yes, and I'll repeat the point again. It's all about what Celtic, they need to come with answers on what they're going to do to fix these problems that have been present for years. I'm not saying that Celtic have a divine right or a God-given right to be in the Champions League every year, but surely be in the best shape and be prepared for what the other team are going to come with. Kairat Almaty, who were not a good side, but they still managed to beat Celtic in a penalty shootout after Celtic failed to score in 210 minutes. Those problems could have been addressed by Celtic being more proactive, and then that comes down to their strategies and the transfer window and what they do. So yes, they've made mistakes, but we need to know what Celtic are going to do to fix these problems so that this doesn't happen again, so that we're not in the same space again where fans are so disgruntled. Every home game, you can feel the toxicity in the air, which has been there since, basically the end of August, start of September, unfortunately, because it's anger that's been there for a couple of months now. So it's all about Celtic sorting that. And this is the thing that I think the other point that I want to make, and I don't want to forget the point, everybody wants Celtic to be in a better place. This isn't, these fan groups aren't meeting up with Celtic to make the club worse or to cause discomfort or disruption. At the end of the day, they want to see Celtic be the best that they can be and do the best that they can do, because they're Celtic supporters, they're fan organisations, they want the club to be doing well. And unfortunately at the moment they're not doing well in certain areas, so you're hoping that they've heard the points, they can take those points on board and they can make Celtic better than what they are currently. But I think we're in hope rather than expectation, because unfortunately we've been in this position before and things haven't changed long term.
Scott DeGaulle saying you could cut it short and just say the board aren't bothered about fans and we'll do it their way. And I think there's an element of truth to that, to be honest. I mean, what you're saying there, where you say they need accountability for their failings, and I think Celtic's stance is that there isn't really a case to answer. It's just that transfer window that they got wrong, which I'm not agreeing with. I'm just saying that seems to be their point of view, and that they're recognising the summer transfer didn't go well, but there are no structural issues at Celtic to address, which... I don't know. I think there is, and I think there's real problems there. And I think the fact nobody, it seems in this meeting, we'll see in the minutes, but the Celtic Fans Collective didn't mention Dermot Desmond once in their statement, and they haven't really put a focus on Dermot Desmond today. I think they see Dermot Desmond as some kind of untouchable figure, but I think the reality is that, yes, while he is an untouchable figure, he still has a say on... business at Celtic, it seems, at a certain level, and I'm not sure if that's viable in 2025. I think it would be far preferable for me, and just speaking from my point of view and my personal opinion, is that Celtic need to just give a budget to someone who can then enact a footballing strategy, and we need to move away from this kind of these non-executive directors pitching in on transfers on a day-to-day basis, where they need to sign off on negotiations and a certain level of transfer fee. I just don't think that's conducive to an agile, aggressive club in the transfer market where timing is everything. And listen, the club can point to continued European participation, but that was the result of a boosting European coefficient that, one, came from Russia getting chucked out of UEFA competition. That was a factor. And two, other clubs getting positive results in Europe too, which helped boost the coefficient. Now, that is no longer, that crutch is no longer there. This automatic promotion into the Champions League is no longer there. That's the reality that Celtic are now facing. And when you look at the reality of the next 5 years and that the qualification becomes more of an issue again, then you'd only need to look at Celtic's record in recent times. And 7 out of 9 times in the qualification process of the Champions League going out to teams with fewer resources is not a record that points to me of European success. And the club need to be very careful with what they're communicating on that, because fans know what the record is. They know why they were in the Champions League over the last few years, and they know that qualification hasn't been good enough. So trying to go, there's nothing to see here, is quite absurd, if you ask me, Ryan.
See, for me, when they talk about European participation, with the fact that there's free competitions now, it's harder for Celtic not to be involved in Europe than... I know the Champions League is difficult to get to and they've had their troubles with qualifying. The proof is in the pudding with the record. But when they talk about qualifying for Europe as a whole, that you've got the Europa League and then you've got the Conference League as well. If Celtic are finishing first or second, then they are guaranteed basically a Europa League or a Conference League. So the fact that they're in Europe, it should be that is the barest of bare minimums for the club. Celtic will be participating in Europe. You look at the teams that are playing in the Conference League and you're thinking Celtic have got to be playing Europe every year. You look at some of the teams in the Europa League as well and you're like... the prestige of Celtic, you're wanting them to be playing in the Champions League rather than playing some of the teams in Europa League, but they don't deserve to be there, and that's due to the failings of recruitment and on-field matters as well.
And I think, communicating that participation in European competition is some kind of achievement when more often than not Celtic have been seeded in the qualification process and have more resources than all the other clubs in their route of that process. I think it's not a grand achievement for Celtic to be reached in the group stages of the Champions League, and again that they haven't really been doing over the last decade when they have had to go through a qualification process. So it's a strange one for me. It's all very strange. Brown Warrior saying, what is absurd is thinking you have any relevance to these guys. The sooner you realise you're just a customer, the better. Deny them their customer and then watch the change in attitude. And listen, I've said this, I've skirted around this issue a few times. I mean, I understand why boycotts would be divisive, and I don't know how feasible it is for the wider Celtic support to participate in a boycott, but I do believe that ultimately this comes down to Celtic failing in a business sense by not engaging with what they deem to be their customer base. And I do agree, I think the board and the executives at times do see Celtic fans as customers. That goes against the romance of what football is and what we are brought up to believe as football supporters. But ultimately, they are the customer base of the club. And it doesn't strike me as good business sense to continue to alienate that group of people who are essentially your customer base. It's like a shop or an outlet going, no, we're going to put up all our prices and we're not going to tell you why, and you've just got to deal with it. Like, it's silly, Ryan. It's silly stuff, and ultimately I think it will affect the bottom line. I think we're already seeing it. You know, I do think that they are having problems shifting tickets. I mean, you're seeing discounted tickets being promoted or marketed to people through texts and emails for the Braga game, for example. And as I say, I do believe retail sales were down in September to a significant degree. And so they need to be very careful, because this is just the start of all of this. And I think the Celtic Fans Collective is going to grow. And if Celtic don't get their act together, they're only going to grow. The Fans Collective is only going to grow in relevancy if Celtic aren't offering a viable alternative.
It's a snowball effect. It's probably a medium-sized snowball at the moment, but it can get bigger and bigger, and it will get bigger and bigger if Celtic continue to have this stance on certain things, because more and more fans will read what's coming out, they'll read statements, and then maybe those that previously weren't on board with the displeasure of the board will then get on that boat and start their own protests, and they'll vote with their feet and not go to games. One thing I will say is that there will be that passionate section, and I'm not saying that fans aren't passionate on the other side, because they certainly are, and that's the reason why they'd be boycotting games. They'd be boycotting out of passion for the club and wanting change to happen positively through, for the club side of things, negative actions. But there will be some fans that will go to the games regardless, and I think it's important to strike that balance. That there will be supporters that continue to go to every single game, and they will just not be involved in any of these protests unless it gets to a dreadful stage where there is just complete apathy between one side and the other. But even then, you'll still have fans that will decide to go to the games, and I think I saw that at the weekend. There was people that weren't at the game. But there was still a good amount of fans at the ground, and yes, there was people selling spares outside the ground, something that you weren't really seeing as much in recent years, because ticket sales have been good. But even the fact, as you pointed out, that tickets for European games are now going on general sale. Celtic were in the Champions League. Would that have even been happening? So it's a direct response and a direct conclusion, and I'm trying to think of the word.
I mean, you were speaking to fans. You were speaking to fans at the weekend, Brian, and you said to me off air before we were going on air. You said the mood's not good today. The feeling amongst the support is not good. After you were speaking to people, and so it's so even with the people who are going to matches and are continuing to turn out, there's unhappiness there. It's not. Yep. And that speaks to me as something that this isn't going to go away. When people are actively turning up to the game with the mids on their face, I don't think that's a good sign for the football club.
Well, that's the thing. Even when I was going up and speaking to people outside Celtic Park at the Velodrome, so many people are like, no, don't want to talk about Celtic, because they can't be bothered talking about Celtic. It's almost as if it's a little bit of a chore going to Celtic Park at the moment, just because it's habitual, and you're going to Celtic Park because you're a Celtic fan, and that's what you do. That's your habits. That's what you're used to. It's your as I said, it's your habits. It's what you do at the weekend. Every second weekend when there is a game on at Celtic Park, you will go and support the team. But yeah, the atmosphere was off. It was completely off, and it has been off recently. As much as we like to talk about being optimistic before the games, and I was optimistic before the Braga game, it doesn't take too much or take too long before that toxic sort of atmosphere and apathy comes into it. I think it's a mix, a 50-50 mix between toxicity and apathy. Because you get some fans that sort of roll their eyes when a goal goes in and they're like, oh, well, this is just what happens because of what's happened in the transfer window, because Celtic are ill prepared for the season ahead. And then there's anger, there's people that are still clearly angry with what's going on. So it's not a good mix when those two go together, because you've got some fans that are really annoyed and you've got some fans making no noise at all. It's not a good mix, and I did feel that on Saturday as a bit of a byproduct of that game on Thursday, the annoyance and disappointment of the European result. People go into the game and they just weren't happy with things that were going on, and you could see it in their faces that they were going to the game as a habit rather than maybe some wanting to go to the game, which is a little bit concerning in my eyes.
Yeah, Ian Roy saying, I want to know operating cost, who earns what and where is the money going? And listen, the raw detail of Celtic's operating costs is that it was £117 million across the last year, from a turnover that generated £143 million. Those operating expenses are higher than they've ever been, and we don't have much detail at this point about what those costs are really made up from. There is an annual report that is more detailed and released in conjunction with the AGM upcoming. The AGM is expected next month, and I guess that's probably where the next kind of clash between club and supporters and shareholders comes from. I know from speaking to people that I think there is going to be some sort of organised effort. And listen, the collective has said this in statements as well. I'm not talking out of class here, but they are basically essentially saying that they're going to have some sort of organised strategy for this AGM, in which I think the AGM in recent years has become a bit of a circus in many respects. You get a few odd questions. The club just really have PR sound bites for questions, but from what I understand, there's going to be more of an effort for fans and shareholders attending that to have more structure to the questions that they're asking and put the key issues on stage and in front of the spotlight, on governance, on the role of non-executive directors, on the footballing strategy over the long term. I think Celtic, again, if they go into this unprepared, the AGM unprepared, I think they'll be left looking a little bit embarrassed. I think they need good substantive answers to the questions that will be raised. I think if they just try to pass it off as PR of, our strategy as a club is to create Champions League players and not really give any detail beyond that, again, I think that will be another PR misstep that continues to alienate people. But I do see the AGM as like the next kind of meeting or the next, not flashpoint, I think that's too strong, it's not flashpoint, but just the next kind of spark in the story that brings the debate alive again and has everyone talking about it.
Completely agree, yeah, and it's a chance for shareholders, supporters to talk to the board, and there'll be no hiding place. You're just hoping that the questions, and that would be one of my big worries that you've mentioned, and the fact that there will be a more organised approach from attendees and shareholders is positive, because we've all heard some of the questions that some of the questions become headlines of their own. I remember doing a live blog last year, and some of the questions that were being asked by some of the shareholders were, quite frankly, wild. And then some of the answers from the board as well. It's all about the tone. I think the tone is so important as well with that. No more smart replies from the board. No more penalty to Rangers replies from the board would be absolutely brilliant. I think they've got to be briefed on that beforehand. Responses
it's gone beyond
like
that. It's gone beyond those little pot shots, which, while amusing and do, it's a wee bit of patter, like, it's not befitting of the situation that Celtic are in currently. If you're focused on Celtic, it's like, I've always been of this opinion. I've been of this opinion for years. I really feel at times it's almost irrelevant what happens across the city. I want Celtic to be the best it can be, not just in a Scottish context, but in a European context, and that has nothing to do with Rangers,
Yeah, I just don't think I know they've not got the goodwill with the support to be throwing off remarks like that at an AGM. I don't think they can afford to be doing that this time. As you said, it's gone past that stage, and it's got to be handled business-like. It's not a joke or a jolly. They've got to really face the music when it comes to the shareholders, who, as you said, and I'm glad to hear, will be more organised in their approach and their questions and their type of questions that they'll be handing over to the hierarchy. So that's a positive step in that regard, that there will be a more unified approach to asking the questions that need to be asked.
Brown Warrior asking, do we know just how high the percentage of the UEFA financial fair play we are actually hitting? Now, that's a very good question. It's one I have been considering. This is an international break, of course, so there's not much football to talk about. So I have actually been looking into this. I'm going to try and have something out on this later this week. It's quite difficult when you don't have the detail of the annual report and you just have the headline figures from the financial statement. So I'll see what I can do in that regard. But I know that the year prior it was something like 43% or under 50% anyway. I'm not quite sure what it was this year. I think Celtic's point is that it's the danger of what happens in future years rather than what happened last year. And so, again, just to be fair to Celtic, their viewpoint is that, you know, if revenue does decline, if one of the risks is that Celtic fans are turned off by the experience of supporting Celtic, and revenue declines, where does that leave Celtic in relation to financial fair play, etc.? So they see this as something that they have to plan for over the next 2 or 3 years and beyond probably, which is why they're more risk averse with that calculation than perhaps the numbers of looking in hindsight of the number is from our perspective. But I think it is important to know what that percentage is. And listen, I really think that's possibly something Celtic should be communicating publicly. Now, they have an obligation to report their financial results. There's no obligation of them to report what percentage of the UEFA targets they're hitting on a yearly basis, but I think some sort of steer from the club on what they feel the situation is currently without just saying, no, people don't understand these regulations. I think having some clarity from that on the club, again, would be a show of good faith that they're releasing information that they're not obligated to, Ryan. And I guess that, again, will go some way towards rebuilding trust. The only reason they release the accounts is because they have to as a public company. I'm sure if they could get away with not releasing them, they would, you know?
Yeah, if they weren't part of the London Stock Exchange, then I don't think they would be. I think they'd be keeping that secretive as well, like they do with many of their other dealings, unfortunately. Yeah, the financial fair play is something that affects every club that's involved in European competition and just European football in general. And you know that excuse that people don't understand financial fair play. Well, why not teach them and make them more aware of what's going on? Then everybody will understand, and then you won't have that disconnect, or you will have less of a disconnect between the board, who think that they're doing no wrong, and the supporters who don't think that the club are spending enough and are equipping the club well enough for those European competitions that Celtic play in, and domestically as well, because you know the squad isn't good enough in certain areas. Well, I think that they will get the job done this season, hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood and all that. There are areas that are clearly not sufficient or deficient at the moment for Brendan Rodgers, which is a problem, and that's domestically as well. He was saying that after Motherwell. So you know, if you can't get it right even domestically, then there has to be things that need to be changed, and in the way that the club work. But I think that excuse about fans not understanding financial fair play, well, why not show them how it works, and then there'll be more of a clearer understanding between the two parties, because it's all about understanding. These two sides have got to have a better understanding of how each other work and how each other think and operate, and the way that they can do that is by building bridges, and that could be a bridge that quite easily built. Put out a statement, show how financial fair play's worked, show where Celtic are, and the sort of workings of that, where they're placed and their percentage, and then I think that'd be a good way to start some goodwill. You know, even an understanding of what's going on financially.
And listen, my belief is, look, if Celtic are confident in their stances and are confident in their viewpoint and their strategy, then why are they afraid to communicate it? Like, it just strikes me as odd. Again, this is 2025, Ryan. It's not 30 years ago.
I know.
Like, it's just silly. It's very silly that if they are so confident in their stance and do feel aggrieved with all this noise going on around the club and the way the media portray them and the way they're reported on, then put your point of view across. Don't be scared to say that you're in the right. Now, people might disagree with them, but that's another reality of the modern age, that they will find people do disagree with them regardless of what they say. But if they are confident in their stance and their processes, then why are they not talking about them?
I know, and especially when their finances are so good. You know, you look at their interim reports and their AGM and you know the end of year financials, etc. And I might have named two of the same things there. Sorry, it's not my forte. But their finances, I know, even as someone who's not as good with all the financial aspects of football, look at the profits that they've made. Look at their operating That they're clearly an affluent, well-off club, but they could be better off if they did their jobs better and they were more agile and maybe more aggressive in the transfer window. The previous manager did say that Celtic needed to be more aggressive in the transfer window. That was your manager saying that. So the fact that maybe they haven't stuck with that is a bit concerning in itself. But they're a rich club for being in Scotland, but I think that they could be even more. They could be better off. So that's got to be the aim. And I would just hope that Celtic are more bring about more communication with the support. That's my main hope. I want the communication to be clearer, but that is something that I've wanted for at least 6, 7, 8, 9 years. You'll probably wanted it for even longer than I have, but we're all in the same boat together, regardless of how long we've wanted communication. We've all wanted better communication between the club and the supporters. I think it's now come to a point now where it's necessary, it's absolutely required to avoid this situation snowballing into a bigger problem.
I just need to underline, like, the communications is fine, but it needs to be backed by substance. Like, it's not good enough to just say we had a meeting with fans and we enjoyed hearing this perspective of supporters. What is that? That is nothing. And people aren't daft. People know that that's nothing. Hazel Finn saying didn't like the media leak was essentially marked as closed by Michael Nicholson. I think this needed dealt with and reported on properly. It was an attack on our manager. Someone should have left shame on the board. And listen, Brendan Rodgers said this publicly too. Now, Brendan Rodgers' stance of late, he was asked about this in a press conference more recently, and just did say also the matter is closed. So I think internally Celtic feel like the matter is closed. But again, I think when something comes into the public domain and the manager's publicly speaking about it, I think it's prudent for Celtic to communicate outcomes of that and just saying the matter's closed and there's no case to answer and that it was unsubstantiated, the report. Look, and listen, if that is true, then I've seen Celtic take harsh media stances on outlets prior, and really if they do feel like that, I think it's telling that I'm not saying Celtic should be banning journalists, because that's not what I believe should happen regardless. I don't like it when Celtic do that. I've said that in the past before I was doing this as a job, etc. I think they've ran and had issues with the BBC in the past and had other issues. I don't like Celtic banning reporters, but they have done that in the past. So if they feel aggrieved in this situation again, why is that not being communicated and why are we not seeing any outcome of that? It looks odd when something like that happens. Brendan Rodgers speaks in the media. They say there's no case to answer. We'll just brush it all under the carpet, essentially. Again, that is not good enough in this day and age.
And that also points to the fact that the person that briefed, that person who put the article out, they're still in the club. That dynamic is still there. There's not been any
it's Celtic's viewpoint that nobody in the club did brief it, and if so, then they should. That's what they should be saying publicly too. It's just it's an odd one.
Yes,
right? That story's been odd from the start for me.
Clear.
Yeah, they should be making that clear. If that is their viewpoint, they should be making that clear. I think trying this kind of it's just another thing that's in limbo at the moment that doesn't have any transparency, and I guess that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah, that was a big problem. That when that article came out, and it still is a big problem to an extent because it showed that Brendan Rodgers was absolutely incensed by the report that came out. He was,
and the fact he's angry about it says to me, like, if Brendan Rodgers thinks it's legitimate, then why should anyone else not think it's legitimate? We could say, you can't disparage the outlet who reported it when Brendan Rodgers is so firm with his viewpoint on it that it was unacceptable and he wanted answers. Brendan Rodgers thought it was a legitimate report. Yeah,
back your manager. You've got he's taken so many hits this season, and he's not devoid of criticism for how some of this season has went on. Let me underline that point. But he is the spokesperson for everything. Apart from that meeting on Monday where Michael Nicholson and Chris Mackay, etc., spoke to the supporters, Brendan Rodgers has been the one in front of a microphone for the whole of this season talking about Celtic's shortcomings, both on the pitch and off the pitch with transfers. So, the fact that he had to go and fight his corner once again after, the international break, after that article came out was... And the fact that case is closed, well... If the case is closed, then what have they found out? What's their findings? Where is the problem? Because otherwise, if they haven't found the problem, or if it was fabricated, then that's got to be communicated as well here. It's a real problem area for me, and it's something that I don't think you can just close without giving clarity on the findings of what transpired, whether it happened or not.
Yeah, and I guess that's where it all leaves it at the moment. I guess what comes immediately after all of this is the minutes will be released by each party, and then we can see what each party thinks has been said, which
Compare
again
and contrast.
is an absurdity to me, because surely the record of what is said should be a factual thing, and there shouldn't be really any debate about it. But from what I understand, it seems like inevitable that there'll be some difference in the perception of what was said, and
That's
how
where
it
an
was said.
independent. That's where a maybe freelance isn't the word, but an independent party could have came in and done the minutes for that to give a fair account of what both sides were
That's
saying.
a good point.
Now,
That's a good point.
we're going to have two versions, essentially, because we know there will be differences. Unfortunately, this is Celtic that we're talking about, and there will probably be difference to what they're saying, and the Celtic fans will have their own version of events as well. But I think that's where somebody in the middle could have been handy as an independent, non-biased source documenting what transpired between the two groups in that meeting.
I think that's a very good point. I think if one party's coming out of the meeting feeling like they've misstepped, it's easy for them to muddy the waters by presenting things in a different way. And I think something independent in that regard could have helped. I guess it's one of the things that protesters may learn from moving forward too, that they can't really rely on fact being the basis of what is communicated. Unfortunately, that is the situation we're in. Okay, we're going to leave it there, everyone. Thank you all for your questions. The chat's been lively today. I appreciate it. I tried to get to some of your comments. Couldn't get to them all, obviously. We're back later this evening. I did an hour-long show with Hamish, but they looked at a lot of on-pitch stuff at the moment in conjunction with all this fan stuff, and the questions arising for it. I'm pretty sure there was different points made than what was on this show, so even if you've watched this morning, you can watch this evening's show. I think it'll be going up just after 5 p.m. Myself and Hamish in the format that we've been doing on a weekly basis. It's pre-recorded, so the thoughts are a little bit more measured, although I do find myself going on a rant at the end of that one as well, Ryan. I find myself in that one when I was recording it late last night. I found myself getting more and more annoyed that nobody's talking about Dermot Desmond, and it's just why? What's going on there? Like, for me, again, Dermot Desmond is part of this issue here at Celtic and has effective control over the club, and he's very rarely talked about, and that's confusing to me, I think, as someone who observes Celtic and supports Celtic on a daily basis. So, yeah, check that out around 5 o'clock later this evening if you want. If you want to go up on the website, we do have my kind of written thoughts on how the fans meeting transpired and the risks around the financial stuff of what Celtic are playing with here. So that's currently on celticway.co.uk. We do have other stuff. We're chatting to different managers and former coaches of players around the international break. Is a good chance to stop talking about current events and just reflect on where things are going at Celtic. So we'll have plenty coming up on the website and the YouTube channel over the next few days, is my point, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can join us £1 for 6 months at www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. Still running that offer. So get involved. £1 will have you sorted for the next 6 months for both matters on the pitch and off the pitch. We'll keep you posted with everything Celtic related.
We certainly will. Yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll leave it there. As I say, we'll be back later on, so do join us then. We'll put it up as one of those live premieres on YouTube, so it'll feel like a live show, but it's pre-recorded. But there will be an opportunity for the chat to be open, because I know part of the appeal of a show like this is that everyone talks to each other in the chat as well. So as I say, there will be that opportunity this evening as well. Ian Roy's asking, where's Big Tony? So I know there was this issue before where Tony was off and we couldn't say that he was off, etc. Tony's just on holiday this week, everyone. So Tony's just taking some annual leave this week, so you won't be around for the rest of the week, but Tony will be back next week, and we look forward to that. So just to clear that up as well. Okay, everyone, goodbye. We'll see you next time on the Celtic Way.